2004, Lionsgate released a movie that shocked the world, becoming a surprise box office hit despite its controversial depictions of extreme violence. The name of that movie, of course, was Fahrenheit 9/11.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Now, I was born in the 1900s, before the towers fell, but I never saw that movie because it was rated R and I was a minor. And I couldn't get anyone to go with me because everyone said that it was liberal bullshit.
Like husbands carrying their dead wives and things like that. That was extremely difficult to deal with because you're like, shoot.
But one October afternoon, in an act of teenage rebellion, I went to the theater myself and I bought a ticket to The Princess Diaries 2 Royal Engagement. This was my cover story. I crossed the box office threshold, intending to begin my new life as a juvenile delinquent. But it turned out Fahrenheit 9/11 wasn't playing anymore, and I was determined to commit some kind of cinema crime, so I just snuck into a random movie called Saw, which I knew nothing about and was in no way psychologically prepared for. In this movie, Saw, there's these two guys, Dr. Lawrence Gordon and Very F***ing Confused.
My name is Very F***ing Confused!
Also known as Adam. They wake up in a grungy bathroom with their ankles changed to pipes and realize they've been kidnapped by a serial killer known as Jigsaw, who appears to his victims in the guise of a gay clown riding a tricycle to deliver his signature phrase, "I want to play a game."
I want to play a game. 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 I want to play a game.
I'd like to play a game.
You want to play games, motherfucker?
Now these games, or traps, are like ramshackle, torture-themed escape rooms where the victim has to suffer to survive. For example, one guy has to crawl through a maze of razor wire. Another guy is covered in flammable jelly and has to walk around on broken glass using a candle to find the code to a safe. And this woman Amanda has to dig into a guy's intestines to get the key to a reverse bear trap attached to her head before it rips her face apart. Jigsaw condemns his victims for failing to appreciate their lives.
Most people are so ungrateful to be alive, but not you. Not anymore.
He claims the traps are rehabilitation, offering victims an opportunity to be reborn by defying death and redeeming life through sacrifice of flesh and blood. When a victim dies, he cuts a jigsaw piece out of their skin to symbolize a missing part of them, the will to survive. Now, most of Jigsaw's victims don't survive, which makes his rationale highly questionable. You can't be grateful to be alive if you're dead. In fact, the traps seem more like cruel, ironic punishments that turn supposed sins against the sinner.
To turn each sin against the sinner.
Paul, the victim of the razor wire maze, is condemned by Jigsaw for self-harming.
But if you want to live, you'll have to cut yourself again. How much blood will you shed to stay alive, Paul?
Dr. Gordon's sin was that he didn't spend enough time with his family. He worked too much, he was having an affair, kind of. So now he has to murder Adam in this bathroom, or Jigsaw will have his wife and daughter whacked to teach a valuable life lesson.
You have to die.
No, I want to live! I want to live!
Sorry.
Lawrence escapes the bathroom trap by amputating his own leg with a hacksaw. Oh hey, that's the name of the movie. Jigsaw then reveals his true identity in a twist that's more than 2 decades old, so you're not allowed to complain about spoilers. He then locks Adam in the bathroom to die alone. Game over.
Game over.
And the credits roll to the sounds of Adam's haunting screams. So, this was a difficult way for my teenage self to learn that maybe there's actually a reason movies are rated R, and maybe I was not, in fact, mature enough to handle it.
Can we get out of here?
No, I'm enjoying this.
Well, I can't watch.
I left the theater feeling traumatized by what I'd seen, and actually wishing I'd been one theater over watching The Princess Diaries.
Dear Diary, well, it's me.
Why the party, darling?
Yeah, we're just having a little bit of fun.
I remember wandering the cinema hallways afterward, thinking that Saw, the movie itself, was cruel, evil even, that the director was probably a psychopath, and that the only people who could possibly enjoy watching it were, no doubt, sadistic perverts. Anyway, I've been watching the Saw movies a lot lately. There are 10 of them now, maybe more by the time I finish this video for Halloween, Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day. The Saw sequels are so graphically violent, they make the first one look like, well, like the Princess Diaries.
I offered to have him hung by his toes in our courtyard.
It's still kind of weird seeing Saw promos on buses and like at Taco Bell, but in the last 20 years, I've acquired a taste for this sort of thing. When I was a teenage boy, I had the sensibility of an old woman, and now that I'm an old woman, I have the taste of a teenage boy. Or maybe I just stopped being such a snob. Lots of people like these movies. In 2010, Saw became the highest grossing horror franchise of all time, raking in unthinkable stacks of cash. The series continues to be loved by millions of fans, some of whom are not sadistic perverts. James Wan, co-creator of the first film with writer Lee Whannell, has directed several other popular horror movies and probably is not a psychopath. So I think my original judgment of Saw was wrong. I had an emotional reaction, and instead of reflecting on that, I got sanctimonious. But that's understandable. I was 15, I was sheltered, I'd never seen torture in a movie before, and as the type of person who swallows antidepressants to hide the pain,
You're the type of person who swallows antidepressants to hide the pain.
I felt personally attacked by Jigsaw's targeting of mentally ill victims like Amanda, who's an addict, and Paul, who Jigsaw accuses of self-harming for attention.
Did you cut yourself because you truly wanted to die, or did you just want some attention?
I identified with these characters. I felt like the movie wanted to hurt me. I didn't have the media literacy to distinguish between Jigsaw's viewpoint and the viewpoint of the film itself, which, again, is understandable. 15-year-olds aren't supposed to have sophisticated thoughts about movies, which, theoretically, is the job of professional film critics. So it's less understandable that, in the 2000s, many professional film critics had basically the same dumb opinion about Saw that I did. Critics despise these movies, and they had some very harsh words to say about the swinish vulgarians swarming into theaters to watch them. Quote, "Saw has art house ambitions, but it's nothing but a glorified snuff film. A sicko horror film whose sadism is topped only by its absurdity. Gore for the sake of gore. A quick, cheaply produced studio money-making machine feeding off Americans' insatiable bloodlust. It's the perfect movie for people who spent their childhood pulling the wings off flies and incinerating ants with a magnifying glass, but never got around to becoming serial killers themselves. It ought to be condemned as nothing less than Nazi filmmaking." So, isn't this a little bit hysterical? It's fine to not like Saw, that's a valid opinion. You're allowed to not like it. It is definitely not for everyone, but professional critics should be able to defend that opinion without lazily accusing the audience of being Nazis and serial killers. Critics of Saw often framed the series as a symptom of post-9/11 American sadism, the same sickness that led us to Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. And while it's true that America is full of psychopaths who gladly kill and torture for fun, I don't think the Saw movies are the best evidence for that. The White House Twitter account is, "Get your concentration camp merch now." Also, the creators of Saw aren't even American. James Wan and Lee Whannell are both Australian, and the majority of Saw franchise box office revenue is international. Isn't that inspiring? Despite our national differences, we can all come together to enjoy violence. Many critics were so outraged by Saw, they didn't even bother to engage with it as art, instead dismissing the movies as snuff films with nothing to offer but gore for the sake of gore. This misrepresentation defined Saw's reputation and still does. The phrase that people usually use is torture porn, a disapproving term coined in 2006 by critic David Edelstein to describe a trend of horror movies with graphic scenes of bondage and mutilation, specifically Saw, Hostel, Wolf Creek, The Devil's Rejects, and Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ.
Do you believe God wrote this film?
Wow.
God ordains everything.
The terrible reputation of torture porn rests on two main accusations. One is that torture porn is sadistic and therefore morally corrosive. It allegedly appeals only to the baser instincts. Oh, you know the ones. Accusation 2 is that torture porn is the lowest form of horror, that movies like Saw use gore for shock value because they're cynical cash grabs that are simply too lazy and unsophisticated to think of smarter ways to scare people.
It sucks. It's not scary, it's gross. I hate all that torture porn shit.
The 2000s torture porn trend is still often maligned as the horror genre's flop era. People compare it negatively both to classic slashers like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and to the current trend of elevated horror. Starting with The Babadook, The Witch, Hereditary, and Get Out. Movies that endeared the horror genre to gatekeepers of middle-brow taste, with artful cinematography and ostentatious use of allegory to explore serious themes. Oh, the monster is a metaphor for trauma. Wow, that's really elevated. It's so elevated, the camera's turning upside down. Whoa!
Pretty girls should always smile.
Oh, this is a movie about patriarchal beauty standards. That's a theme. Themes are very elevated.
Pretty girls should always smile. Pretty girls should always smile.
All right, we got it. Thank you.
We need her young. We need her hot.
Ugh. It's only a matter of time until a character in a horror movie says the word neoliberalism.
That's what keeps the shareholders happy.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I love elevated horror. Many of these films are objectively better than Saw, and I'm glad that horror is finally getting the critical recognition it deserves. But with that recognition comes the risk of smugness. And all this elevation is giving me a contrarian urge to act as a defense attorney on behalf of torture porn, supposedly a stupid genre for perverts and pig people with nothing of substance to say. I think these accusations are not true. The implication of the phrase torture porn is that the violence in movies like Saw is gratuitous, that it's mindless cruelty for the sake of cruelty with no purpose but sadistic pleasure.
It's just torture and murder. No plot, no characters. I think it's what's next.
But Saw is not just torture and murder. There's plot, there's characters. Jigsaw may be one of the most interesting characters in the history of horror. He's not just some maniac with a mask and a knife, he's a villain with a philosophy.
You must meet death in order to be reborn.
Jigsaw's real name is John Kramer.
John Kramer?
Kramer is an old man dying of brain cancer who had a spiritual awakening after a failed suicide attempt that inspired his torture rehab method.
If a subject survives my method, he or she is instantly rehabilitated.
But the guy is clearly full of shit. Most victims don't survive, and the ones who do, well, they're not thrilled about it.
You wanna know the best thing that happened to me after having to cut off my own arm? Is handicapped parking at the damn mall!
The obvious cruelty and ineffectiveness of John's techniques make it all seem like the pretext for a bitter man's personal vendetta, his need to punish scapegoats for his own regrets.
Those who don't appreciate life do not deserve life.
He reinflicts his own pain on the world because he's not strong enough to cope with loss or make peace with death. Just like people do in real life. And he's so high on his own supply, he actually thinks that he's a savior, not a serial killer.
I've never murdered anyone in my life. The decisions are up to them.
Killing is distasteful. To him.
Killing is distasteful.
To me.
I hate pedophiles. Now, I don't want to overstate the case. The John Kramer character study is not the main draw of the franchise, which clearly is the traps, these Baroque spectacles of mutilation and dismemberment. When you go to a Saw movie, that is what you're signing up to watch. But the traps aren't just meaningless violence, they're moral dilemmas that dramatize ideas about justice and freedom and suffering. Like in Saw 4, where a victim of domestic violence is skewered to her abuser with metal spikes in such a way that she can only save her life by ending his. Or in Saw 6, when Jigsaw goes full Luigi and kidnaps a health insurance CEO, forcing him to choose which other victims live or die, literally bloodying his hands with the consequences of decisions that he's used to shrugging off as just the cost of doing business.
It's a business! My decisions aren't made this way!
Is there something cruel about all this? Well, yeah, obviously, but cruelty isn't all there is, and cinematic sadism is not especially unique to Saw. First of all, Your Honor, what even is sadism? I'm always saying this to my psychiatrist. Well, sadism is pleasure, right? Pleasure taken in the suffering of others. But critics of Saw rarely describe their viewing experience as guilty pleasure or as any kind of pleasure. In fact, the opposite. Their complaint is that watching Saw is deeply unpleasant. They call it disgusting, repulsive, nauseous, unwatchable. But then for some reason, they assume that the oinking masses watching the same movie must all be drunk on some euphoric bloodlust. And I just don't think that's true. On r/Saw, fans of the series often post threads discussing traps they find most hard to watch, describing them as disgusting, uncomfortable, painful, nauseous. They talk about wincing, cringing, needing to look away. It's the same experience the critics are having: discomfort and disgust, pain, not pleasure. So paradoxically, it's like Saw is considered sadistic because the violence is unpleasant, because the killing is distasteful.
Killing is distasteful!
Of course, to be a fan of Saw, you have to have a taste for the distasteful. No one would watch it if there weren't some kind of masochistic pleasure in unpleasantness.
This is the most fun I've had without lubricant.
But there's nothing unusual about enjoying spectacles of violence, and much more mainstream movies are far less conflicted about encouraging the pleasure of it. For example, I know I said that Saw was the first time I ever saw torture in a movie, but I lied. There is another movie that I watched when I was even younger, with graphic scenes of hardcore violence. I am of course referring to the beloved family Christmas classic, Home Alone. In Home Alone, 8-year-old Kevin McAllister is accidentally left behind when his affluent family travels to Paris for Christmas. When Kevin discovers that the family home is being scouted by a pair of burglars known as the Wet Bandits, he goes full Viet Cong and rigs the house with traps. The movie climaxes in a foiled home invasion. Jigsaw Jr. shoots BB guns at the bandits' heads and groins. He sears their hands on heated doorknobs, bashes their faces with scalding irons, impales their feet on nails and broken glass, incinerates their scalps, breaks their teeth, and tops it off with the classic tarantula to the face. The sequel escalates it even further. Kevin crushes skulls with bricks, applies a staple gun to a man's genitals, and just straight up electrocutes a guy. I watched this movie as a kid, and I wasn't disturbed at all. I laughed and laughed like a little psychopath. So why does violence in Home Alone feel entertaining, while violence in Saw feels disturbing? You could argue that the violence in Home Alone is cartoonish. There's no blood and gore, it's less realistic, but I don't know, those broken Christmas ornaments felt pretty real. And Saw is not exactly immune to cartoonishness.
My family needs me!
I think the biggest difference is that Home Alone is constructed so that by the time we see the violence, the movie has convinced us that the Wet Bandits deserve it, which gives us a morally acceptable reason to enjoy brutality. Kevin McAllister is a property owner standing his ground. This is self-defense. It's justified. The sequel even implicates the bandits in a comically villainous scheme to steal money from a children's hospital just to make it extra clear they have it coming. To quote the late great Hannibal Lecter,
"Doing bad things to bad people makes you feel good."
Saw usually withholds that satisfaction. Jigsaw thinks his violence is justified, but his arguments are very suspect. We, the audience, are not convinced. Jigsaw's victims are flawed people, but not evil to the point of being unrelatable, and their suffering is so extreme we rarely feel that they deserve it. So moral framing is part of what determines how we feel when watching violence. Another part is point of view. Which characters does the movie encourage us to identify with? We spend most of Home Alone with Kevin, and the movie clearly aligns with his perspective, in contrast to the Wet Bandits, who are outsiders, literally creepy strangers in a van. There's even some questionable ethnic coding where Joe Pesci is like a sleazy Italian with a gold tooth. And Marv, well, it's not subtle.
Happy Hanukkah, Marv.
American don't fly to the promised land, little buddy.
What's with these guys anyway? Are they married? Do they live in the van? Are they gay?
Maybe we're in the church.
I'm not going in there. The first Saw puts us mainly in the point of view of Lawrence and Adam, the victims of the bathroom trap. The story is suspenseful because we identify with their predicament. Saw movies in general make such a spectacle of suffering that it provokes compassion. like a crucifix. It activates your mirror neurons. You wince and cringe, as if the victim's pain becomes your own. In my naive childhood viewings, I think I loved the violence in Home Alone because I identified with the aggressor, and I hated the violence in Saw because I identified with the victims. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if in Home Alone we pleasantly identify with the violence of the aggressor, and if in Saw we painfully identify with the victims of the violence, then isn't it in fact the case that Home Alone is more sadistic than Saw? The philosophy degree was really worth it for this. Look, obviously this is a troll argument. I'm trying to provoke you into thinking about the questions I am asking here. How does watching violence make you feel? What makes it satisfying or disturbing? How should watching violence make you feel? Is any of this ethical? And do we care?
I don't give a crap if you covered yourself in peanut butter and had a 15-hooker gangbang.
Why is it so much fun to watch other people get hurt? Well, because other people are not me. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Well, I guess I should play the tape.
Hello, Natalie. I want to play a game. For years, you have profited from overproduced video essays. But is there any substance behind that style? Or do you only cut skin deep?
Okay, well, that's enough of that. Look, the sadism allegations against horror movies didn't start with torture porn. Christians, feminists, film critics, the buzzkill trinity, they've been complaining about this for most of a century. In 1973, the Reverend Billy Graham condemned The Exorcist, quote, "The devil is in every frame of that film." Oh, shut up. At least the feminist critique is based in reality. You've probably seen 100 video essays about Laura Mulvey and the male gaze, this idea that not just horror, but cinema in general takes a masculine point of view and gets the audience off on sado-voyeuristic gazing at objectified women.
We need her young. We need her hot.
And yeah, that's true, especially in slasher movies where the camera often takes a predatory point of view, stalking nubile teens and watching them get penetrated by phallic objects. There's really no point in denying the sado-voyeurism allegations against slashers. It's just a fact. It's obvious. Think about that famous shot of Pam approaching the house in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The camera gives us shark eyes for this girl. We're predators stalking our prey.
You're yum yum. Come on, Jerry, let's go inside forever.
And according to the rules of slashers that this movie helped create, you know that means this yum yum's going on the meat hook later. Saw actually stands out in the horror genre by not disproportionately victimizing women. Men's bodies take a lot of damage in Saw movies. In fact, over 70% of Jigsaw's victims are male, according to the large language model I asked, so that may or may not be true. Really makes you think. A notable exception is Saw 3D, a movie so misogynistic the director may as well have flashed the words "fuck women" on screen in bold Futura font for 90 minutes.
The same woman has played each of you for a fool. She is toxic.
I think we're breaking up with you, Tina. Stupid bitch!
It's generally not a good sign when a sequel is in 3D. Leave that shit in James Cameron's evil laboratory where it belongs. Anyway, Laura Mulvey isn't wrong, but her quest to castrate the male gaze oversimplifies. She takes a butcher knife to a situation that requires a scalpel. Actually, these days, they often do the surgery with robots. In her book Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Carol J. Clover takes a more nuanced approach. She argues slashers often make a kind of transgender shift in point of view, leading the audience from initial predatory gazing to eventually identify with the struggle of a female hero called the final girl. Quote, "The wildly phallic imagery of slasher films, chainsaws, knives, power drills, and the like, is a kind of fig leaf over their real work, aligning the viewers with a female character and giving them dose after dose of so-called feminine masochism of the most extreme sort." Oh yeah, I love feminine masochism. Keep going. Don't stop.
Are you gonna behave?
This also applies to crime media. You might shift between sadistic identification with the killer, or the cop interrogating the killer, get his ass, masochistic identification with the victims, or voyeuristic identification with the detective. Choose your own perversion. My sadistic pleasure is the series Hannibal, because I get off watching Mads Mikkelsen make edible arrangements out of human meat.
Nothing here is vegetarian.
Hannibal is pleasant to watch because it beautifies murder. It makes crime scenes into works of art. It's very elevated. Whereas Saw is deliberately ugly. The setting is usually a Silent Hill bathroom or like a meat factory. The lighting is jaundiced and oppressive, and the movie's edited by a teenager who overdosed on Adderall. The refusal to beautify violence forces me to linger on the pain and suffering of victims. Ew. That's not very elevated. It's unpleasant, masochistic. Even Edelstein acknowledges the masochism in his original critique of torture porn. Quote, "In the same way that some women cut themselves, they say, to feel something, maybe some moviegoers need to identify with people being cut to feel something too." Oh, okay. I don't know why he says that with a level of condescension worthy of Jigsaw himself.
Did you just want some attention?
There's actually a word for dramatic art where the audience identifies with characters who suffer. It's called tragedy. People have actually been talking about this for like 2,000 years. Very elevated people too, like Aristotle, Hegel, Schopenhauer, this freak. Aristotle says that when we watch a tragedy, we experience fear and pity as catharsis, an emotional purge. Blech. Didn't you learn this in high school? Or were you not paying attention? Yeah, me either. Honestly, I just had to look this up. But Edelstein went to Harvard, and probably he knows about catharsis. So what exactly is the drama here? If we all agree there's more to Saw than sadism, then why are we feuding? Are these critics against masochism too? Are we allowed to enjoy anything? Edelstein specifically objects to what he calls the nihilism of torture porn, the lack of clear moral direction given to the violence. And as an example of this, he cites Will Self's essay, The American Vice, where Self recounts walking out of Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs during the torture scene, which he felt he could not finish without vomiting.
Well, I can't watch.
Okay, tangent. This is now a video about Quentin Tarantino. I'm so sorry. It's happening. Tarantino is a director, you've probably heard of him, he's hard to avoid, who's attracted decades of controversy about, among other things, graphic ultra-violence in his movies. In his first film, Reservoir Dogs, a group of criminals botch a jewel heist, then hide out in a warehouse where they turn against each other. One of these dog men, Mr. Blonde, is an unhinged sadist who even the other criminals refer to as a psycho.
Psychopath ain't a professional. Can't work with a psychopath.
He arrives at the warehouse with a cop he's taken hostage, duct tapes him to a chair, and says he's going to torture him for fun.
Not to get information. It's amusing to me to torture a cop.
The scene that follows is, in fact, uncomfortable. I understand the urge to stop watching. Blonde tunes the radio to jaunty 70s rock song Stuck in the Middle with You, and between singing and dancing along, he slices the cop's ear off with a straight razor, delivers bits of witty banter.
Was that as good for you as it was for me?
And he proceeds to douse the cop in gasoline, preparing to burn him alive. The music gives a feeling of revelry to what would otherwise be a purely horrifying scene. It's a classic trope, using upbeat music to infuse violence with sadistic energy. It goes back to Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, which equates the ecstasy of Beethoven with the ecstasy of sexual assault.
Oh, it was gorgeousness and gorgeosity made flesh.
See also Hip to be Square in American Psycho. See also Ride of the Valkyries in Apocalypse Now. See also that Enya song and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. See also Freebird and The Devil's Rejects. We could keep going. I could just do a video about this.
Everybody knows this is how the story goes. The
perfectly done musical sequence and a violence sequence, they are the exact same thing.
In the same way that some people like to get their aggression out by playing drums or hitting people, I like to hit the piano.
And it is like a cum shot. I was waiting for it to crash.
Will Self's objection to the Reservoir Dogs torture scene is that, quote, we lose sight of whose exact POV we are inhabiting. The sadist who is doing the torturing? The policeman? The incapacitated accomplice? It is this vacillation in POV that forces the sinister card of complicity upon the viewer. So I think I like this scene for the same reason that Self hates it, because of the unstable ambiguity in point of view. On the one hand, the movie has done absolutely nothing to convince us that the cop deserves this. So we're watching a man be tortured to death for no reason, and the moral response to that is to identify with the victim and be horrified. However, the jaunty music and the dancing and the banter
hey, what's going on?
Convey how fun this is for Mr. Blonde. So much so, I kind of feel infected by the pleasure of his cruelty, and the tension of that split identification with these characters is emotionally challenging. Will Self hates this. He feels like watching it makes him an accomplice, that the filmmaker's refusal to take a moral stand shifts responsibility onto the viewer, and he doesn't want that responsibility, so he stops watching.
Well, I can't watch.
Why don't I stop watching? Well, perversion. It's just as simple as that. I don't know, I guess I think there's something honest about cruelty that doesn't make excuses for itself. To paraphrase Karl Marx, Tarantino is a very honest sadist. He doesn't make excuses.
The opening shot of a guy jerking off to slasher films, that is so cool.
In interviews, he shamelessly describes movie violence as fun and cool, despite constant accusations that he's glorifying brutality and corrupting the youth.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
because it's so much fun, Jan. Get it?
I think we all have a part of ourselves that enjoys destruction, dominance, and brutality. Like in real life, I'm stuck being an influencer, but in Skyrim, I'm a very important murderer.
Aren't we the overachiever?
Yes, Mother. What's unusual about Tarantino is his honesty. Most people disguise their sadism. They make excuses. And morality is often the excuse. Instead of admitting that we find violence fun, like this dweeb savant, we insist on moral rationales, like retribution, punishment, self-defense, atonement, justice. But is violence with a moral purpose any less sadistic? Less fun? In his later movies, Tarantino increasingly uses moral framing to make violence palatable. By 2003's Kill Bill, Tarantino has changed genres from gritty crime drama to revenge movie. The emotional arc of a revenge movie has two acts. Act 1 is the fuck around act, where a villain victimizes a hero. The audience then identifies with the victim's desire for payback. Act 2 is the find out act, where the desire is fulfilled in
what the movie advertisements refer to as a roaring rampage of revenge.
Kill Bill opens with a massacre at Uma Thurman's wedding, where everyone is murdered by these people called the Deadly Vipers Assassination Squad. Okay. The wedding massacre is bad violence. We identify with the victim. This feels bad. We don't like it. Then there's a little rape revenge subplot where the bride awakes from a coma to discover that her unconscious body is being pimped out to random perverts by a hospital orderly, whose name is Buck because he's here to fuck.
My name is Bucks, and I'm here to fuck.
What is it with Bucks? I can't catch a break from these people. The bride bites the lip off one of these perverts and then repeatedly slams Buck's head in a steel door really, really hard. This is good violence. This feels good. We like this because the movie has convinced us that the guy deserves it. And so the find out act begins. The bride hunts down the Deadly Vipers in a roaring rampage of revenge that ends up in Japan, and is basically an excuse for Quentin to weeb out and spend an hour watching sexy women slice each other's limbs off with katanas.
I am the audience, all right? You know, it's like I'm jerking off the audience, and it is like a cum shot.
The violence in Kill Bill is fun. It's bloody fantasy wish fulfillment. The bad violence feels bad so that the good violence feels good. And that symmetry of violence leaves us feeling like the karmic balance is restored. I know how all of this works because Stanley Kubrick explained it to me. Quote, "We have seen so many times that the body of a film serves merely as an excuse for motivating a final blood-crazed slaughter by the hero of his enemies, and at the same time to relieve the audience's guilt of enjoying this mayhem." Right, so guilt about enjoying violence is a problem to be solved, and revenge is a solution. But Tarantino has discovered an even better solution.
The next thing I'll do is this World War II movie. The only thing about it is, it's a big Mount Everest kind of epic.
In movies like Django Unchained, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and in Inglourious Bastards, Tarantino fabricates a genre of social justice fairy tale where wish fulfillment movie violence intervenes on real historical atrocities like slavery, the Manson murders, and all that Nazi stuff. For example, Inglourious Bastards takes place once upon a time in Nazi-occupied France. See, it's like a fairy tale. In the first scene, SS Colonel Hans Landa, aka the Jew Hunter, interrogates a farmer who's hiding a Jewish family in his basement.
You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
After 16 minutes of airtight tension, the dweeb is good at making movies. That's not the issue. Colonel Landa has his men come in and massacre them all, except for one, Shoshana Dreyfus, who escapes.
Au revoir, Shoshana!
This is bad violence. This feels bad. We don't like it. And the scene reminds you why you hate the Nazis. In case you forgot. Absolute cinema. Then we cut to an outrageous comedy performance by Brad Pitt as American Lieutenant Aldo Raine, who's putting together a team of 8 Jewish American soldiers called the Inglourious Bastards to do one thing and one thing only.
Killing Nazis.
Aldo explains that each man owes him
100 Nazi scalps,
which we watch them harvest in graphic detail.
We will be cruel to the Germans.
The Bastards' plot converges with Shoshana's when they pull off concurrent plans to massacre the Nazi high command, including Adolf Hitler, at the premiere of a propaganda film. After a real change, Shoshana's face appears on the screen and tells the Nazis
that you are all going to die.
Her lover Marcel ignites a mountain of flammable film behind the screen, engulfing the theater in flames, while the bastards gun down Hitler and Goebbels. The crowd of Nazis stampede into locked doors as a voice rings out, "My name is Shoshana Dreyfus, and this is the face of Jewish vengeance." And the bastards keep firing machine guns into the crowd until their bombs go off, and then the cinema explodes and everyone dies. This is good violence. This feels good. We like this.
And it is like a cum shot.
It's a roaring rampage of revenge, but because the antagonist is literally Hitler, it feels like more than bloody satisfaction. It feels like justice. Or at least that is how it would feel if I didn't know better. We've gone from Reservoir Dogs, where the torture scene felt conflicted and uncomfortable, to Inglourious Bastards, where I'm watching a theater full of people get incinerated alive, and I feel nothing but simple childlike joy, the likes of which I haven't known since Home Alone. Is this really moral progress?
Directors don't get better as they get older. They get worse.
You could argue it is, because torturing a random guy is bad and killing Hitler is good. But Tarantino didn't actually do those things. He made entertaining movies. And in his own words, violence in real life is terrible. Violence in movies can be cool. It's just another color to work with. Cruelty is Tarantino's favorite color of artistic pleasure, and the violence in his movies is just that.
Violence is one of the most cinematic things. Almost as if Edison and the Lumiere brothers invented the camera to film violence.
There's a scene where the Inglourious Bastards interrogate a Nazi sergeant, who chooses to die with honor rather than betray his fellow Germans.
Got a German here wants to die for country. Oblige him.
Donnie Donowitz, aka the Bear Jew, then savagely beats him to death with a baseball bat while screeching about the Red Sox like a typical Boston lunatic.
Then we packed on his feet for Teddy! Fucking ball game!
So we might feel that killing Nazis is righteous, but for the Bastards, it's also entertainment.
Quite frankly, watching Donnie beat Nazis to death is close we ever get to going to the movies.
Killing is amusing to them, like it is to Mr. Blonde, and like the spectacle of it is to Tarantino.
Boom, 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 boom! Knocks it out of the park!
Critic Daniel Mendelsohn said, Tarantino indulges his taste for vengeful violence by turning Jews into Nazis. You hate to see it. This parallel is implied by Tarantino himself, when he shows Hitler laughing sadistically at a film that seems to be nothing but an endless reel of Allied soldiers getting shot. Hitler, the bastards, and we, the audience, are united by our taste for violence.
Been watching Donnie beat Nazis to death as close as we ever get to going to the movies.
Morality and ideology are exposed as shallow pretexts for a more basic sadism. Even Hans Landa betrays the Germans without hesitation as soon as it's convenient, showing that he never really was a sincere or loyal Nazi. So why did he become the Jew hunter? Well, because
it's so much fun, Chan. Get it?
Bingo! How fun!
This is what I mean when I say Reservoir Dogs is honest about cruelty. Not that Inglourious Basterds is dishonest, it actually goes out of its way to expose itself as sadistic entertainment with no moral purpose. But the premise of Jewish vengeance against Nazis inherently gives the audience a righteous alibi. Unlike Reservoir Dogs, which doesn't let us get away with splitting violence into good and evil. It shows the horror and the fun of violence all at once. There's no heroes, no role models, just people being people. Some are worse than others, but they're all a bunch of dogs. You can call it nihilistic, but it feels more real to me than fairy tales like Inglourious Basterds, where the heroes are bloodthirsty sadists who kill and torture for fun, but the villains are literally Hitler, so it's fine maybe? Maybe not, I don't know. This is supposed to be a video about Saw, and I just wrote an entire essay about Tarantino. God damn it, why can't I focus on one thing? Well, this Tarantino stuff is very relevant to Saw, and I will now explain how. Otherwise you guys are gonna be really mad at me. My point is that moral purpose doesn't take the cruelty out of violence. It may, in fact, intensify it. And isn't that kind of what Saw is all about? Perfect transition. Nailed it. Alright, I'm focused. I'm locked in. Jigsaw. Jig fucking Saw.
Jig fucking Saw.
Jig fucking Saw.
Saw is about the relationship between morality and violence. John Kramer is a moral serial killer, almost a parody of morality itself. He's the kind of judgmental tyrant who will burn a guy alive just for playing sick to get some paid time off.
If you're so sick, then why do I have so many photos of you up and about?
He's so self-righteous, he doesn't even think that what he's doing counts as killing.
We don't kill.
You chopped a fucking head off!
I've never murdered anyone in my life. Decisions are up to them.
Really, it's the victim's fault for allowing themselves to die in twisted death machines, which, yes, he may have trapped them in, but only because he was trying to help them.
You did this to me.
No, you did this to yourself.
He wants them to survive, but if they don't, that's fine, because the fact that they died proves that they deserved to die.
Those who don't appreciate life do not deserve life.
People say he likes to watch.
Looks like our friend Jigsaw likes to book himself front row seats to his own sick little games.
But he's definitely not doing this for fun. Killing is distasteful to him.
Killing is distasteful.
To me. Oh, yes. There will be blood.
It's not emotional at all, because he's an enlightened Stoic philosopher, and everything he does is completely rational.
The heart cannot be involved. Emotionally, there can be nothing there. It can never be personal.
So Jigsaw is up there with Claude Frollo as one of the most sanctimonious villains of all time.
Request permission to stop this cruelty.
In a moment, Captain. A lesson needs to be learned here.
As the pupil learned her lesson.
What am I supposed to learn from this? Look at my arm!
And it's this kind of moralistic villainy that actually keeps me up at night, because it's the mindset that most often leads to real-world violence.
Have you been harboring gypsies?
Our home is always open to the weary traveler.
I'm placing you and your family under house arrest.
Outside of horror movies, there aren't that many nihilistic sadists doing random chainsaw massacres for fun. It's just the rural working class blowing off a little economic anxiety.
Listen, you Malibu middle-class Barbie piece of shit, I'm trying to work here. Work? You ever work?
I don't know anyone who acts like Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, but there's jigsaws everywhere for those with the eyes to see. Our society is ruled by these assholes because their horrible personalities are irresistible to broken people with daddy issues.
I found myself a father, a leader, a teacher.
Maybe that's why I've been watching Saw. I'm trying to understand the mindset of people who feel righteous sending other human beings to a place called Alligator Alcatraz. Real Jigsaw type of shit. I don't think nihilism is the problem. Violence in Saw is cruel, but it isn't meaningless. Jigsaw's cruelty is not in conflict with his morality. His cruelty is his morality. Every saw trap is a caricature of some principle of ethics or justice, a punishment that fits the crime, a lesson learned through pain, an abuser forced to reckon with the harm he's caused his victims, a higher purpose that requires you to sacrifice pieces of yourself. These are common moral values that most people probably accept. Saw traps isolate the element of cruelty in those values and exaggerate it. Now I'm going to try to summarize Jigsaw's philosophy, but it's difficult because, as many critics have observed, his reasoning is not consistent. Some inconsistency is the result of deliberate choices by the writers to depict him as a hypocrite. John Kramer is a serial killer with a brain tumor, so it does make sense he wouldn't be the most coherent thinker. But other inconsistencies have no explanation beyond the simple fact that the Saw movies are not good.
Death is a surprise party. Unless, of course, you're already dead on the inside.
I'm sorry if I misled you about this. I've been defending them to be contrarian, but that can only go so far. The truth is that the series has gone through so many writers and directors, they sometimes forget what the movie is about. In the first movie, Jigsaw is some kind of moral Darwinist. He chooses victims because he thinks they lack the will to survive.
We have a human race that doesn't have the edge or the will to survive.
The purpose of the traps is to rehabilitate that will. At the end of the first movie, when Jigsaw says,
"Most people are so ungrateful to be alive, but not you. Not anymore."
It feels like a fourth wall break, like he's telling the audience we'll be more grateful for our lives now that we've spent 2 hours watching people die in vicious murder contraptions. And there might even be some truth to that. Now that he mentions it, I guess I do appreciate not being in a saw trap. At least that's what I would say if I were not currently in a saw trap. Wait, how am I getting out of this? Well, that's a later problem. The Roman poet Lucretius, Elevated, wrote about the pleasure of watching a sinking ship from the comfort of dry land, quote, "Not that we wish them ill, but we realize how free we are from the troubles they face." The timeless pleasure of sucks to be you. But as the series progresses, the writers lose track of Jigsaw's MO. He becomes more of a moralist, punishing sinners for miscellaneous crimes, like predatory lending,
You are predators.
taking antidepressants, being too obsessed with saving people,
Will you learn how to let go?
framing your husband for infanticide,
Shut up!
selling a faulty motorcycle to John Kramer's nephew,
$600 for a bike that you listed in excellent condition.
What does any of this have to do with the will to survive? Nothing. The inconsistency makes more sense when you realize that Saw began as basically a cheap knockoff of the movie Seven. Seven is a 1995 crime thriller starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman as detectives hunting down a dangerous predator, Kevin Spacey, who in the movie plays a Christian extremist serial killer called John Doe, whose murders are ironic punishments for the 7 deadly sins. For example, he kills an obese man by force-feeding him to death and writing gluttony on the wall behind the fridge. A scene that really disturbs me because it reminds me of the many times that I have passed out in a plate of spaghetti. John Doe's greed victim is a lawyer who he kills by forcing him to sacrifice a pound of flesh, Merchant of Venice style.
No cartilage, no bone, but only flesh. Merchant of Venice. Didn't see it.
The lust victim is a sex worker penetrated by a bladed strap-on. The sloth victim is bound to a bed for a year. It's worse than it sounds. And the pride victim is a model John Doe mutilates,
Cut off her nose to spite her face,
forcing her to choose either to call for help and live, although disfigured, or to take a lethal dose of sleeping pills, which, of course, she does. As for envy and wrath, well, what's in the box?
Who's in the box? Oh, what's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
Just watch the movie. It's good.
What's in the box?
John Doe's pride murder is pretty much the prototype of a saw trap. The victim has to make a choice between death or mutilation. A classic Jigsaw setup.
Live or die. Make your choice.
Morgan Freeman calls John Doe a preacher.
He's preaching.
his murders are his sermons.
His murders are his sermons to us.
Jigsaw is likewise described as preaching, as teaching sick life lessons. He's basically a secular John Doe. The influence is obvious. Lee Whannell acknowledges this, with self-aware hindsight even describing Saw as a 23-year-old doing their best impression of Seven. Fair enough. So although generally a worse movie, Saw does innovate on Seven, mainly in that unlike the Punisher John Doe, Jigsaw thinks his traps are rehabilitation.
If a subject survives my method, he or she is instantly rehabilitated.
If John Doe is creating hell on earth, maybe Jigsaw is creating purgatory. In Seven, John Doe is canonically inspired by Dante's Divine Comedy.
Dante, goddamn poetry writing, friggin' piece of shit, fucker.
In Dante's Purgatorio, souls cleanse themselves through acts of penance that are mirrors of the deadly sins. So the slothful run in circles, the envious have their eyes sewn shut, the gluttonous starve just out of reach of food. Dante invented a term for this kind of ironic penalty. He calls it Contrapasso, Italian for something like counter-suffering, a punishment that mirrors the crime. Contrapasso is first mentioned in the Inferno by a politician damned to carry his own severed head through hell for the sin of turning a son against his father. So literal decapitation is the punishment for metaphorically decapitating a family. The Inferno is full of Contrapasso tortures, like the eternal wind that sweeps lustful souls as they once were swept around by passion, or the false prophets and astrologers whose heads are twisted backwards because they tried to see the future. A lot of Saw traps use the same kind of Contrapasso logic. A criminal who burned people with his cons and lies
For years you have burned those around you with your lies.
now has to crawl into a furnace to survive. A witness to a fatal car crash froze instead of helping. Now she'll literally freeze into a human popsicle unless the victim's father acts fast enough to get the key. A drug dealer ensnared his customers in pits of addiction. Now he has to crawl into a pit of filthy syringes. Or he can just throw Amanda in. I guess that also works. Each Saw trap is a variation on poetic justice, Contrapasso, and you could categorize them according to the different ways in which a punishment can fit the crime. Some traps are literal retaliation, like the razor wire maze, where cutting punishes cutting. Others are metaphorical, like the freezer trap, where the punishment of freezing symbolizes the crime of inaction.
He was speaking metaphorically. He does that a lot.
These can also be more subtle, like the bathroom trap, which doesn't obviously mirror a specific crime until Adam makes this confession.
Face it, Larry, we're both bullshitters.
So these two men who are full of shit are trapped together in a filthy lavatory. Maybe it's not that deep. Well, I will make it that deep. I want to play a game. Other traps are what I'll call didactic. Technically, all traps are supposed to teach a lesson.
What the fuck am I supposed to learn from this, huh? Look at my arm!
But in true didactic traps, the victim literally can't survive unless they learn the lesson that the trap is meant to teach. For example, in Saw 5, a group of selfish criminals have to help each other to survive a trap sequence.
You fucking killed her.
I didn't trust her.
Because the final trap demands they sacrifice 10 pints of blood.
We were supposed to work together, so we all survived. That's the game.
A valuable lesson about teamwork that I'm sure will make them productive members of society. The last category of traps I'll call revelatory justice, where the victim is forced to confront the harm they've done to other people. It's like in A Christmas Carol, where the ghost of Christmas future shows Scrooge the Cratchit family mourning Tiny Tim, whose sad Victorian child crutch lingers poignantly, now ownerless. And everyone cries, except Oscar Wilde, who probably thinks it's hilarious. I guess it is pretty funny. That's revelatory justice. Scrooge is made to understand the consequences of his actions from the victim's point of view. In Saw 6, Jigsaw puts the health insurance CEO through a series of these ordeals, forcing him to witness the effects of decisions he usually makes with an impersonal formula.
The choice is not so clear when you are face to face with the people whose blood will stain your hands.
First, he has to win a breath-holding competition against his company's janitor, who smokes and has a pre-existing condition, and so obviously he loses and dies. Now's as good a time as any to mention that Jigsaw has no class consciousness. He has the politics of the median voter. Yes, he wants to torture CEOs, but he also thinks that janitors who smoke deserve to die.
This man has continued to smoke even though he has a history of high blood pressure.
Anyway, then the CEO has to choose 2 out of 6 employees to save from death by shotgun, looking them in the eye as he kills them.
Look at me! When you're killing me, you look at me!
I'm sure after that he'd be just like Scrooge on Christmas Day, if only the final trap hadn't injected him with hydrofluoric acid. Have we talked about how killing is distasteful?
To me.
The violence in Saw is really very similar to Dante's Hell or Purgatory, except that unlike Saw, Dante is very elevated, so no one ever accuses the Inferno of being torture porn. But like, what is this poem if not a metaphysical torture safari? Don't get me wrong, I love the Divine Comedy, definitely a top 10 torture book for me, but I don't think it's morally defensible. I simply give myself permission to enjoy immoral art, because I believe in aesthetic decadence. Camille Paglia's view that, quote, literature's endless murders and disasters are there for contemplative pleasure, not moral lesson. Though inevitably it's both. And from the moral point of view, I think Dante is much harder to defend than Saw, because Jigsaw is the villain. You can argue Saw is cruel, but the movie doesn't ask you to enjoy the cruelty or agree with it. Dante, on the other hand, presents eternal torture as divine justice. In the Inferno, Dante is often tempted to sympathize with suffering sinners, and every time, Virgil has to remind him that empathy is liberal bullshit. It's blasphemy, in fact, to pity the damned, because it implies dissension from God's judgment.
Don't ask me to pity those people. I don't mourn them any more than I do the thousands that died at Sodom and Gomorrah.
Now this seems pretty fucked up to me, but that's because I'm not a medieval Christian. From the modern liberal point of view, we see compassion as the basis of morality and cruelty as the basis of evil. That's why we're so outraged about torture. But Dante didn't have this hang-up. In his version of Christianity, the root of evil isn't cruelty, it's disobedience, turning away from God. So cruelty is not a moral problem for him as long as it results from the contemplation of God's perfect moral order.
The Lord works in mysterious ways.
To quote the famous theologian St. Thomas of Aquasomething,
St. Thomas Aquasomething?
St. Thomas Aquinas.
The blessed in glory will see the sufferings of the damned in order that their bliss may be more delightful to them. Looks like our friend Thomas of Aquasomething likes to book himself front row seats to God's sick little games.
Nothing wrong with a man taking pleasure in his work.
So if God's judgment entails a moral mandate to enjoy the suffering of sinners, then is Dante really any better than Tarantino? What is wrong with these people? Are they perverted? Are they just Italian? Obviously there's a sadistic fascination on display in the Inferno, and in a lot of Christian art. Dante famously depicts his enemies in hell, which feels like a real Tarantino move. But I do think there's a difference. Quentin Tarantino is not an ethically serious person. He's a decadent aesthete, a dorky demon child who thinks that violence is fun.
He's got that kind of energy that a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old has, where they're not looking anywhere to find out what people's faces look like while they do things. They're just doing things.
Justice is just an excuse for him to play his little games.
Taking cinema and, getting you hard.
Yeah.
And making you come.
But I think Dante is morally sincere when he condemns himself not for cruelty, but for pity. Justice for Dante is not an excuse for violence, because justice is violence. And it's not always fun. At times in the Inferno, Dante even cries over the suffering of the damned, like a liberal cuckold. But these are blasphemous tears, resulting from a rebellious misalignment with God's will. St. Augustine said, quote, "The saints will not pity the suffering of the damned, but will rejoice in the manifestation of divine justice." Now, we could sit here like smug Voltaires, laughing at these people and their jigsaw god, but first, let's make sure we're not throwing hacksaws from glass torture chambers. Is the idea of God's judgment a sadistic cope? Well, yeah, of course. But it's an understandable cope for the universal human predicament of injustice, of living in a world where the ratio of sowing to reaping is, by all appearances, completely fucked.
Good doesn't lead to good, nor bad to bad. People steal, don't get caught. Others lie and cheat and get elected.
Christians aren't the only ones to theorize some kind of sublime cosmic alignment between f***ing around and finding out. An ancient Hindu scripture, the Garuda Purana, describes hell realms, narakas, which would not feel out of place in Dante, like the hell called Kumbhipaka, where in Contrapasso style, people who kill and cook animals are boiled alive in oil. Oink oink, Farmer Hoggett. Babe wants to play a game.
Did you know that pigs are highly compassionate animals?
The Tamil film Aniyan is basically a Hindu version of Seven, but with better musical numbers. David Fincher, I demand that you remake Seven as a musical. Bring Kevin Spacey back. I don't care about the allegations. I want to see him singing in a Dutch tulip field. In Aniyan, rule-obsessed lawyer Ambi becomes a vigilante serial killer whose murders are based on punishments from the Garuda Purana. He writes the word Kumbhipaka in blood at the first murder scene, foreshadowing his next victim, a railway caterer who serves bad food. Ambi kills the cook by frying him into human chicken 65. In Dharmic religions, karma is moral cause and effect. It's less a legal metaphor of crimes and punishments, and more a botanical metaphor of seeds and fruits. But both metaphors give moral order to the world where actions mirror consequences and suffering makes sense. Where, according to a popular meme, the fuck around-itude is directly proportional to the find-out-itude. Beauty and justice converge in the symmetry of crime and punishment, sowing and reaping, action and consequence, debt and repayment, sin and atonement, attack and counterattack. You know, it's like poetry, it rhymes. That's why Dante has an eye for it. Contrapasso is the poetry of pain.
Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
It's difficult for modern liberals to accept that any kind of cruelty could be beautiful, but for most of human history, people haven't had this hang-up. Proportionality of crime and punishment was the basis of most legal systems in the ancient world, like the Latin lex talionis, law of retaliation, an eye for an eye. Scales symbolize justice because justice is balance. It's based on a financial metaphor where crime is debt and punishment is repayment. Justice is balancing the books, it's moral accounting. In some ancient legal systems, crime literally was financial debt, like the Germanic weregild system, where a murderer paid blood money to a victim's family instead of blood. I've talked about this before, but I'll say again that law replaced revenge to solve the problem of cyclical feuds. You know how that goes. If Sollozzo whacks Luca Brasi, and then Michael whacks Sollozzo, and Fabrizio whacks Apollonia, and Barzini massacres my boy, well, pretty soon you've got Clemenza whacking Stracci, you're whacking Tatalia, Cuneo, Mo Green. It makes it very hard to focus on your nephew's baptism. And that's why we have a legal system, so these things don't get out of hand. There's a Greek tragedy about this called the Oresteia by Aeschylus. I promise this is about Saw. The Oresteia starts out with a roaring rampage of revenge. This guy Agamemnon whacks his own daughter as a sacrifice to the gods, but his wife, Clytemnestra, is not thrilled about it. So she whacks Agamemnon, but then her son Orestes whacks Clytemnestra to avenge Agamemnon, and then the Furies, the goddesses of vengeance, they're about to whack Orestes, but Athena intervenes and teaches everyone the concept of a trial by jury, establishing Athens as a city ruled by law and not revenge. Legal justice takes the right to retaliate from victims and gives it to the state, which prevents the endless whacking cycles, but at a cost. Revenge is sweet, and sadistic itches don't get scratched if law makes justice into an impersonal, bureaucratic procedure. Where's the fun in that? The people demand blood. Now, for most of legal history, that hasn't been a problem. It's traditional for criminal justice to overlap with public entertainment. Hanging, burning, beheading, lashing, slicing, lion feeding, drawing and quartering. But then these people called liberals showed up, the kind of people who would later become film critics. And these liberals noticed that the same symmetry that makes retribution satisfying also makes it absurd. If the punishment is the same as the crime, then how can you say that one is good and the other is bad? Two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't make sense to kill people to show that killing is wrong. But then what are we supposed to do with criminals? One liberal solution is to redefine the goal of justice, to say the aim is not to punish criminals, but to rehabilitate them. And that's what Jigsaw says he's doing.
This is not retribution. It's a reawakening.
He believes in giving people second chances.
Everyone deserves a chance.
But John Kramer's idea of rehabilitation is somehow more sadistic than revenge. His traps make John Doe's murders look humane. This is one of the more intriguing ideas in Saw, that a supposedly altruistic method of rehabilitation ends up justifying insanely brutal violence. It's kind of like A Clockwork Orange, where for the first half of the movie, criminal sadist Alex brutalizes people, and then he goes to prison where the law brutalizes him.
An eye for an eye, I say. Someone hits you, you hit back, do you not?
Criminal justice mirrors criminal violence. Alex's former gang become police. Same sadism, different team. But then liberals take over the government and reform the penal system, promoting rehabilitation over retribution.
The new view is that we turn the bad into good.
But their rehabilitation turns out to be behavioral conditioning that basically amounts to torture.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
Violence is a very horrible thing. That's what you're learning now. Your body's learning it.
So the rhetoric of scientific progress and reform just puts a humanistic spin on transformative violence, which is really just an even stricter form of domination.
Violence is a very horrible thing.
Killing is distasteful!
There's a paradox in the liberal animosity toward cruelty, kind of like the paradox of intolerance, that in order to be tolerant, you can't tolerate intolerance. The essayist Montaigne, now that's what I call elevated, articulates this paradox in his essay Of Cruelty, which by the way is just such lib shit. He says cruelty is the worst vice. He gets all squeamish about torture, public executions, and even hunting. Hunting! This 16th century man was so woke, he probably had pronouns. Anyway, his phrase is, I cruelly hate cruelty. That's the paradox, that even the most pacifist morality is still driven by an aggressive impulse, a cruel hatred of cruelty. Liberals theoretically value compassion and oppose cruelty, and they often say they don't believe in retributive justice, but yes, they do. They just use different words for it. Instead of crime and punishment, they use vague, evasive terms like actions and consequences. Accountability. You voted for the leopards eating people's faces party. Now the leopards ate your face. You know, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Some progressive communities advocate what they call accountability processes as an alternative to the oppressive carceral logic of criminal justice. But the supposedly non-carceral accountability processes often still implicitly involve some kind of retributive punishment, from public shaming at best to, well, Kai Cheng Tom describes an incident where, quote, a person who claimed that they were a survivor of intimate partner violence asked the community to beat up their abuser as part of their accountability process, a request that was fulfilled and put the named abuser in the hospital, endangering their life. I want to play a game. I think it's probably impossible to separate justice from cruelty. They're too emotionally entwined. I think you can reduce cruelty, but you probably can't get rid of it entirely. That's why people love Vigilantes so much. You know, like Batman.
I'm vengeance.
Most superheroes, really.
Who is Spider-Man? He's a criminal, that's who he is. A vigilante.
Or Maryland's own beloved Saint Luigi. Or like Gary Plauché, a father who became a folk hero in the 80s when, on live TV, he whacked the diddler who molested his son. Vigilantes reclaim the right to punish from a justice system many people feel is simply not violent enough, especially when it comes to CEOs and diddlers. And far be it from me to besmirch the good name of diddler whacking, most people in Gary's situation would want to do the same. But what should we make of gun YouTubers reenacting Gary's kill shot to celebrate Father's Day?
So gang, we ready to catch a predator?
Catch? What do you mean catch? Catch 38 special in the skull.
Are we doing this for justice? Or because it's so much fun, Jan?
We got our diddler here.
And I'm honestly not judging. I'm not even trying to harsh the buzz. I just think it's good to ask yourself the question before these things get out of hand. In Adelaide, Australia, in the 90s, this guy called John Bunting recruited a gang of youths for the noble purpose of whacking diddlers. But the gang also started whacking and torturing people just for being gay, or fat, or disabled, or women, and they started dissolving the bodies in barrels of acid hidden in a bank vault. And well, long story short, they ended up becoming the most infamous serial killers in Australian history. There's a movie about it. It's depressing. Criminology calls these kinds of murderers mission-oriented serial killers to distinguish them from lust-crazed Jack the Ripper types. A Jack the Ripper knows his violence is wrong.
I always knew that it was wrong, but...
The transgressive thrill might even be a part of why his crimes are so much fun, Jan. He's playing Satan. The John Bunting type is playing God, or God's enforcer. He channels aggression through the superego because he needs a moral pretext.
Is that to say, John, that what you were doing was God's good work?
I was chosen.
Most mission-oriented killers are rancid little Hitler types, social cleansers, who see themselves as purging society of undesirables.
Whores, skunk pussies, buggers, queens, fairies, dopers, junkies. Someday a real rain will come and wash all this scum off the streets.
Like John Doe, whose murders are basically just hate crimes. You know, he kills a fat guy for being fat.
A disgusting man who could barely stand up.
He kills a sex worker for being a sex worker.
And let's not forget the disease-spreading whore.
He kills a Jewish lawyer by making him sacrifice a pound of flesh.
And you both must have secretly been thanking me for that one.
This kind of killer does by vigilante violence essentially the same thing fascists do by law. People support fascist politicians because they need daddy's permission, or even better, daddy's orders, to unleash sadistic impulses. They're like a firing squad waiting for the signal to shoot.
You will give everything to me. Every cell in your body.
Jigsaw is a mutation of John Doe, but he's a different kind of vigilante. He does often target people on the margins of society. Addicts, sex workers, the mentally ill, but he's not a social cleanser. He also targets people he accuses of wasting advantages from birth.
From birth, you've all been given the advantages of few others.
Check your privilege. As we've discussed, Jigsaw has no moral consistency. Some traps require forgiveness, others require murder. Some require cooperation, others betrayal. The theme of sadistic rehabilitation might suggest that Jigsaw is a hypocritical liberal. But I also think that's wrong. I have a theory about Jigsaw that's halfway between analysis and fan fiction, and I'm gonna tell it to you now because if you've watched the video this far, it's too late to stop. You're trapped. I want to play a game. I think Jigsaw can best be understood by comparing him to two other characters, his ex-wife Jill Tuck and his copycat turned disciple Mark Hoffman. I guess we need to address the copycat thing. A lot of the Saw sequel's problems stem from the third movie killing off the two most interesting characters, Jigsaw and his disciple Amanda, who turns against him after finally realizing his philosophy is bullshit.
It's bullshit. Nobody changes. You do is no different than murder. Nobody is reborn. It's all bullshit!
Saw 3 is clearly the conclusion of a trilogy, but it made too much money. That's why I'll still be watching new Saw movies in the nursing home.
You think it's over just because I'm dead? The games have just begun.
Every sequel after 3 has to come up with convoluted reasons for why traps are still a thing, usually involving an ever-expanding lineup of Jigsaw disciples and copycats.
Jigsaw lives forever, through the work of his followers.
One of these copycats is Detective Mark Hoffman, a dirty cop turned vigilante avenger whose traps are simply punishments for people who deserve it.
Justice is the backbone to every peaceful society.
For example, Linkin Park frontman Chester Bennington, who Hoffman glues to a car seat because he's racist.
You, your girlfriend, and your friends are all racist.
He judged others based on the color of their skin. Now he has to rip his own skin off in order to survive. Contrapasso. I'm so glad I read hundreds of stanzas of Italian poetry so I'd have a word to describe what happens to Chester Bennington in Saw 3D. Hoffman's first trap was a bladed pendulum, Edgar Allan Poe, hey how are you, that sliced in half the murderer who killed his sister. A straightforward revenge whacking.
This is the guy that murdered your sister? Well, then I'd say justice was served.
Kramer then kidnaps Hoffman and converts him into a born-again Jigsawnian by pointing a shotgun at his face. A very persuasive argument. Hoffman and Kramer are supposed to represent two opposing views of justice: Hoffman's retribution versus Kramer's view that everyone deserves a chance at rehabilitation. But by this point in the series, we've seen enough to know that Kramer and Hoffman really aren't that different. In Saw 4, we learned that Kramer's first trap was also revenge adjacent. So Kramer used to have a wife, Jill Tuck, who ran a clinic for recovering addicts. While she was pregnant with their son, Jill was attacked by one of her patients, causing her to miscarry. As so often happens to the wives of characters who matter, John's subsequent depression led to their divorce, and to the failed suicide attempt that inspired his torture career, his first victim being Cecil, the very addict who attacked his wife and killed their unborn son. Kramer puts Cecil in a trap that forces him to push his face through interlocking knives
to match your face with the ugliness of your soul.
So just like Hoffman's, Kramer's first victim was a criminal who harmed his family. Kramer claims that this is not revenge, but yes it is.
We can never come from anger or from vengeance.
Yes you can. Yes you do. I'm yelling at a fictional serial killer, just completely losing it. Kramer often chooses victims who have harmed him in some way. The doctor who gave him a terminal diagnosis, the health insurance CEO who denied coverage for his experimental treatment, the scammers who defrauded him. Even when there's no direct revenge motive, he tends to target people who reflect personal fixations. Like he has a general vendetta against addicts, doctors, and frauds. Several victims are also in failing marriages or are parents who don't appreciate their children.
The heart cannot be involved. It can never be personal.
But obviously the heart is involved, and it's extremely personal. This is the good kind of inconsistency, the kind that makes John Kramer an interesting character. Like all men who claim to be purely rational, Kramer lacks emotional self-awareness. He doesn't understand why he does the things he does. The problem is that I'm not sure the writers understand it either. They even try to lampshade Kramer's backstory.
Girl loves boy, boy loves girl. Boy gets girl pregnant, girl loses baby, boy turns into a serial killer. Jill, I'm not buying it.
It actually all makes perfect sense. Allow me to explain. According to the cognitive linguist George Lakoff, I promise this is about Saw, liberals and conservatives are so polarized because their worldviews are based in two different models of the family, which he calls strict father morality versus nurturant parent morality. But I'll just call it daddy politics versus mommy politics, because that's more fun. Liberals align with mommy politics, the idea that an ideal parent or government should act like a nourishing and compassionate mother. In Saw, this is represented by Jill Tuck in her rehab clinic, where she treats addicts with care and patience.
All I wanted to do was help them.
You can't help them. They have to help themselves.
Conservatives align with daddy politics.
They called me daddy.
Their ideal parent or government behaves like a punishing father.
Very smart man said he's our daddy.
Right-wingers say that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. And that's basically Jigsaw. Cecil's attack on Jill is the exact moment that John Kramer became Heisenberg.
Wake up!
I am awake. You know, it's like Daddy arrived and he's taking his belt off, you know?
Daddy argues with Jill over her compassionate mommy approach to rehab, which he dismisses as naive and ineffective.
These people, they will continue to hurt you.
They're addicts, John.
He presents Amanda as evidence that torture rehab works.
It works.
But mommy realizes daddy is a psycho and wisely pieces out, her dreams of being a wine mom shattered. Daddy then steals the motto of mommy's clinic.
Cherish your life. What? The fucking motto.
And he scrawls it in blood red paint on the walls of his torture chambers alongside other inspirational slogans, like if the Manson family became high school guidance counselors. John's fight with Jill gives us insight into his hypocrisy. Daddy politics makes no distinction between punishment and rehabilitation, because according to Daddy, punishment is rehabilitation.
Once you see death up close, then you know what the value of life is.
Less strict forms of discipline are seen as merely coddling that spoils children.
If you allow your hormone-addled 15-year-old daughter to slam the door of her bedroom and give you the finger, you're gonna get more of it. And those kids are gonna wind up in rehab.
You can't help them. They have to help themselves.
And that's why Jigsaw is not a lib. He has the right-wing mindset that Daddy needs to beat his children because he loves them.
You're getting a vigorous spanking because you've been a bad girl. And you're only going to get better when you take responsibility for what you did. That's not said in the spirit of hate. It's not said in the spirit of vengeance or bigotry. Far from it. It's said in the spirit of justice.
Jigsaw takes this logic to the extreme, like a loving God who damns his children to eternal hell. Or as apologists would have it, he lets them damn themselves.
It's you! You did this to me.
No. You did this to yourself.
Free will is very important to Daddy.
Make your choice. Make your choice. Make your choice. Make your choice. The choice is yours. The choice is yours. The choice is yours. The choice is yours.
The choice has been all yours.
Jigsaw is a paternal tyrant whose traps are often tests of obedience masquerading as lessons in gratitude. They always begin with instructions, orders, delivered by cassette or clown. Several traps mainly seem to emphasize the importance of following the rules.
There are rules.
The rules. You have to play by the fucking rules!
Can you follow the rules? To ensure that the rules are followed. Don't forget the rules.
Shut the fuck up!
But you don't like rules, do you?
Many traps are also projective repetitions of the trauma caused by Jigsaw's cancer. Cancer treatments like radiation or chemotherapy are torturous ordeals, which, like saw traps, patients choose to endure for a better chance at survival. Other treatments, like the craniotomy needed to remove Jigsaw's brain tumor, involve sacrificing part of the body for the survival of the whole.
Think of the explosives as a sort of cancer, a malignancy that must be cut out for you to survive.
Jigsaw re-inflicts this trauma on victims of the many traps requiring amputation. These traps are projections of John's cancer and also symbols of a moral cancer. It's like when Jesus said, "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell."
He was speaking metaphorically. He does that a lot.
Jigsaw takes this literally. In one trap, a police informant who spied on others must cut out his own eye.
To give up the one thing you rely on in order to go on living.
There's a lot of traps like this in Spiral, the 9th Saw, which comedian Chris Rock produced and starred in because he wanted to use the Saw franchise to comment on police brutality and also to complain about women.
He made $1 billion selling shrimp, and she still wouldn't fuck him. Women cheat too. I'm going through a divorce. Don't drain my battery watching Twilight.
Also, he probably wanted to cast Samuel L. Jackson so he could say,
"You wanna play games, motherfucker?"
In Spiral, an ACAB Jigsaw copycat puts a trigger-happy cop in a trap that forces him to sacrifice his trigger-happy fingers. Another cop sent innocent people to jail with false testimony and, well, Proverbs 10:31, the treacherous tongue shall be cut off. Saw at its best is not torture porn. It's torture poetry, like Dante without a god to hide behind. It reveals the implicit cruelty of moral judgment by making grotesquely violent spectacles out of it. And its unpleasantness offers a kind of insight missing from every feel-good revenge movie. At least, this is what I want Saw to be. But I'm not completely sure that's what it is. My whole defense of these movies hinges on Jigsaw being the villain, on everyone agreeing that Jigsaw is bad. We do all agree that Jigsaw is bad, right? Saw 10, the most recent installment in the franchise, premiered in 2023, nearly 2 decades after the original. It's the first film in the series to get mostly positive reviews from critics. How often does that happen? That a franchise has 9 consecutive movies that critics trash as unwatchable snuff films, and then the 10th comes out and they say, actually, that was pretty good. So what separates Saw 10 from the other films? Well, the cinematography is a little more elevated. There's none of that crazy panic attack editing. Tobin Bell does give his best performance in 19 years of playing Jigsaw. But the most dramatic change is that Saw 10 tells the story from John Kramer's point of view. Jigsaw is not the villain of this movie. He's become an anti-hero. Unlike most Saw movies, Saw 10 doesn't open with a trap. Instead, we get a moody sequence of John Kramer in an MRI scanner, emphasizing his sickness and vulnerability. When Kramer's doctor tells him he has only a few months to live, An acquaintance from the cancer support group refers him to a Norwegian quack, Dr. Cecilia Peterson. What is it with Petersons?
You've each been working a grift.
Who offers John experimental treatment for the low price of $250,000. John agrees and goes to Mexico, where he's kidnapped by what appear to be cartel goons, but are in fact Cecilia's assistants, who require this charade because they're supposedly being persecuted and silenced by Big Pharma.
The big drug companies are always one step behind.
It's a business!
At the clinic, Cecilia introduces John to her medical team, Mateo, Valentina, Diego, and Gabriela, who in reality are a drug dealer, a prostitute, a cab driver, and an addict. These frauds perform pretend brain surgery on John and tell him that he's cured, but when he returns to the clinic with a thank you gift, he discovers he's been scammed, and Jigsaw mode is activated. He summons Amanda, who makes a sitcom entrance, everyone claps, and the two abduct the scammers and punish them in Contrapasso traps. Diego, the fake surgeon, has pipe bombs sewn into his arms, which he has to surgically remove with scalpels. Mateo, the fake anesthesiologist, has to perform real brain surgery on himself without anesthesia. And Gabriela, the aide, has to break her own hand and foot with a hammer to escape her shackles before a radiation machine burns her to death. Saw 10 is basically just a revenge movie. In the fuck around act, the scammers defraud Kramer. In the find out act, he exacts revenge by ironic medical torture. The revenge is cruel and not fully satisfying because the least deserving get the worst of it. Cecilia's staff, who are all disadvantaged people struggling to survive. Cecilia gets off easy, merely having to escape some poison gas by sacrificing a boyfriend who she clearly doesn't give a shit about. That this movie is basically about an American torturing Mexicans is also a little awkward considering the whole political, all that stuff that's happening. But Jigsaw is not the villain of this movie. Cecilia is. She even puts Carlos, an innocent child, in one of Jigsaw's traps, waterboarding him with blood. This is good. There's not enough child torture in movies these days.
Not waterboarding, huh? Bloodboarding.
In Saw 10's final shot, John, Amanda, and Carlos step out together into the sunrise. What does this mean? Is it rebirth?
It's a reawakening.
Is it the triumph of the nuclear family? Saw movies aren't supposed to end like this. They're supposed to end with gore and screaming and misery. But the more important question is, how have we gone from the Jigsaw of Saw 1, a dangerous maniac who was fully prepared to kill a child just to punish her father's vague crimes against Darwinian instinct, to the Jigsaw of Saw 10, a considerate old man bringing predatory frauds to justice?
All of you promised dying people that you could save their lives. And in doing so, you took advantage of the only thing that they still possessed. Hope.
Is the culmination of a series-spanning trend toward framing violence as retribution, the same trend we saw in Tarantino's career. And I don't know what the writers of Saw 10 were thinking, but my guess is that they were attracted to the revenge plot structure because it makes the violence feel less bad. If that's the case, I guess it worked. The critics are finally happy. There's a general pop culture tendency to reimagine villains as tragic anti-heroes. Joker, Maleficent, Wicked. Remember that Cruella movie where the tragic backstory is that her parents were murdered by Dalmatians? No. I guess I admire the bravery it takes to ask bold questions, like, is evil so wrong? But did we really need to do this with Jigsaw? Even when writers actively discourage it, a lot of audiences still end up identifying with characters who are violent psychopaths. You know, the you missed the point by idolizing them starter pack. Patrick Bateman, Walter White, Tyler Fight Club. Most teenage boys go through a stage of identifying with these characters despite the creator's intentions. Which brings us back to the question we started with. How does watching violence make you feel? I've told you my feelings, but the truth is that it's more subjective than anyone wants to admit. Steven Spielberg said, "Of course every war movie, good or bad, is an anti-war movie." Francois Truffaut said the exact opposite, quote, "I find that violence is very ambiguous in movies. For example, some films claim to be anti-war, but I don't think I've really seen an anti-war film. Every film about war ends up being pro-war." How can well-informed people disagree this dramatically? Truffaut must be right about the ambiguity of movie violence. A movie like Apocalypse Now is clearly intended to be anti-war, but what Francis Ford Coppola failed to consider is that a fleet of helicopters blasting Ride of the Valkyries while destroying a village is badass. Some people will identify with this, or even want to emulate it.
You can hook your CD player up to the tanks.
It's the ultimate rush. Because you know you're going into the fight to begin with, and then you got a good song playing in the background, that gets you real fired up.
And probably the same is true of Saw. I can give endless reasons why I sympathize with victims in these movies, but that's literally just like my opinion, man. Even before Saw 10, there were definitely people who were attracted to Jigsaw, like Eleanor, the Jigsaw fangirl in Saw 8 who has replicas of all his traps.
Hey, a girl's gotta have a hobby.
You get off on this shit?
Lots of people are fascinated by Kramer.
Now, Team Jigsaw personally offends me as an Amanda Lynn shipper.
Are you gonna behave?
But can I really judge them? Didn't I just admit to identifying with Hannibal Lecter? And let's face it, Jigsaw's always had the ingredients of a badass anti-hero. He masterminds these crazy traps while always being calm and in control. He attracts vulnerable female followers with a creepy philosophy that makes no sense. You know, classic badass stuff. It's like Charles Manson or Jim Jones, very popular men in their time.
You will give everything to me, every cell in your body.
Jigsaw is daddy. He's taking his belt off, and people just go crazy for that.
Dad comes home, and he's pissed. Dad is pissed.
John Kramer could probably get elected in this country, and it would be an improvement. In her essay regarding the pain of others, Susan Sontag wrote, "No we should be taken for granted when the subject is looking at other people's pain." Now, she wasn't talking about horror movies, she was talking about photographs of war crimes, but the principle is kind of the same. Her point is that to different people, the same image could inspire peace activism, or incite revenge violence, or just satisfy morbid curiosity. Like how Proust, the most elevated, "We have arrived," described, quote, "that abominable, voluptuous act called reading the paper, whereby all the misfortunes and cataclysms suffered by the universe in the last 24 hours are transmuted into a morning feast for our personal entertainment." I love how lowbrow taste is sadistic bloodlust, and then middlebrow taste is, actually there are deep moral themes, and then highbrow taste is sadistic bloodlust again.
Nothing here is vegetarian.
Spectacles of violence don't speak for themselves. Different people in different contexts will identify with victims or aggressors or no one at all. We need interpretation to know what violence means, to decide what team we're on, who's good and who's bad, who's innocent and who deserves it. And that's why it's so important to watch propaganda. Speaking of which, I did finally watch Fahrenheit 9/11. In that movie, this whiny lib called Michael Moore talks about how American politicians used 9/11 as an excuse to commit war crimes or whatever, and that's bad because people in other countries are human and their lives have value. Now, at first I was thinking, that sounds like the talk of someone who likes to sit in the cuck chair at the Motel 6 and watch his wife get by some with a but I think this whiny lib might actually have a point. Violence often feels righteous to people who have been hurt, whether by 9/11 or cancer, or even something as trivial as, your dad not hugging you ever, and then the first black president humiliating you at White House Correspondents' Dinner because you spread a bunch of racist conspiracy theories. It doesn't need to make logical sense to feel emotionally true, and if daddy says it's true, that's all the permission some people need.
After all, this is the guy that tried to kill my dad at one time.
I guess I'm saying that Americans, we're kind of like Amanda in Saw, trauma-addled junkies with severe, undiagnosed personality disorders, constantly chasing the highs and lows of self-annihilation, driven to insane depths of cruelty by our hopeless attachment to an evil, narcissistic father figure who's old and dying, and devoid of any purpose but inflicting as much pain as possible on his miserable plunge into the grave. And maybe if we could just become self-aware about this, we could do less of it. But how do we awaken that awareness in the masses? How do we bring this madness to an end? Well, I have no idea, I'm sorry. I'm a YouTuber. I'm a YouTuber trapped in a razor wire cage of my own making, and I'm just so sorry for everything. Game over. Oh wait, the game. It's over. Good. Well, that's it, everyone. I guess I'm gonna bleed out now. Good night. He is the one who saws.
You're goddamn right.